was unsafe to go to the police?
Yeah, because the police are there to protect the senators and Congress people. They weren't there to protect staff. And I didn't realize I could have gone outside to the Metro Police. I thought I had to just go to the Capitol Police because that's where it happened. So I didn't feel like they would help me. In 1983, that just wasn't the environment. I mean, I don't know, it was very difficult to report any kind of sexual assault at all, much less someone powerful.
The irony is at the time that Joe Biden was passing this Violence Against Women Act, right, that he's known for. Was it around the time that you were working in the office for him?
Yes, and that was the beginning of it. I think it was passed finally in 1984. But he had rejected it before. He only signed on to it that next year, I think, to get his crime bill passed. I don't really think he was that much of a proponent. That's more staff, and that's more in the background. I was kind of privy to some of those conversations. So that was a lot of staff working very hard to make with research, trying to make that happen. And then when he saw it was advantageous for his crime bill, and it's my opinion that he just basically used it. My friends have more of a different opinion. They think he's actually just using it to cover his misogyny and how he really is. It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, look at me, I'm safe. But not really.
Now, another matter that I had occasion to raise with you, and again, I do not expect you, Ms. Baird, to be able to answer this in detail because you obviously haven't even had a chance to assemble your team and make a firm recommendation to the President on what are very complicated matters relating to criminal law enforcement issues. But as you know, this committee has on 2 occasions passed out of here unanimously a bill entitled that has been sponsored me and others have written and sponsored, referred to as the Violence Against Women's legislation. And for me personally, we all have our separate agendas. I know the senator from Maine has an overwhelming interest in the violence against women issue. I'm not suggesting he agrees with everything in my bill, but for me, it's the single most important criminal justice priority after passage of a comprehensive crime bill. And what I'd like to ask you about, in general terms, is the issue of violence against women. Are you of the view that there is a circumstance in this country as a consequence of state laws impacting on domestic violence or not impacting on domestic violence and spousal abuse, the inability of stay-away orders issued in one state, that is, an order where a woman is being stalked by her former husband, lover, boyfriend, or someone she has never seen in her life, but usually by someone she has known, and a state issues an order suggesting that John Doe must stay away, literally, physically stay away from that individual. When that woman crosses a state line, as you know better than I do, that order is of no consequence. It is a state order. That person can harass the woman. That person can, and we have many instances where they have murdered that woman or physically abused the woman short of death. And I'm of the view that, as is my friend from Maine, that there should be a federalized legislation saying if you get a stay-away order legitimately arrived at in one state, that should be, in effect, transferable from state to state so the woman cannot be harassed. And lastly, and I'm going to stop and ask you to comment generally on the violence against women's legislation or issue. One of the reasons that I wrote this legislation in the first instance several years ago, Ms. Baird, is I found a startling statistic as I was going over the statistics from the Bureau of Justice that lists all the crimes that are reported. I thought violent crime was the ultimate equal opportunity employer. I thought that violent crime was visited upon all sectors of society, age and sex, to the same degree and increased the same degree. And I was startled to find in a 10-year period leading up to 1987 that the violent crime against men, 12%, violent crime against men between the ages of 15 and 24 actually decreased by 12%. Violent crime against women increased in that same period of time by 50%, 50, a 62% difference. Now, we've held extensive hearings Ms. Baird, in this committee, and admittedly, some of the increase may be as a consequence of the generalized and specific women's movement rightfully encouraging and emboldening women to come forward to report crimes that they weren't reporting before. But I can find no evidence in the literature or even anecdotally that suggests that the entire discrepancy between violent crime against men 15 to 24 and women 15 to 24 is accountable by women being willing to come forward. There seems to be a legitimate, real, hardcore difference where women are victimized more than men. Without my talking anymore, that's an awful long prelude to a question and an area of great concern to me. I'd like you to share with this committee your generalized and as specific as you want views as to whether or not the extent of our collective concern here is legitimate, and if so, whether strong action has to be taken.
Well, Senator, I would commend you for your focus on this issue and commend you for the search for those statistics, because I think that there is no question, but just about every woman in this country would tell you that she feels more vulnerable than the men around her. It doesn't take a search for statistics for most women to appreciate that violence against women is an acute problem. I think that it has an even more powerful effect about what this Congress and this federal government is saying to women in recognizing that they are more vulnerable. And so I very much support this and think that it could be a very valuable way for this new administration to begin to work at the crime problem with this Congress.
Well, I appreciate that. Next question I have, if you have an answer, I'd be delighted to hear it, but I acknowledge you may need time to confer with the President and others as to whether or not you support what I'm about to suggest. Everyone seems willing to support my violence against women's legislation as it relates to providing for more police officers, better lighting in places where women are more exposed. For example, today, the evidence shows that many more women are professional women like yourself, like you, having to work 12 and 14 hours a day and figure out how to take care of their children, and going to bus stops at 10 o'clock at night when it's dark, or going to their automobiles and parking garages at 10 o'clock at night after working late, whether they're working as a maid in an office building or as a senior partner in a law firm or a senior executive in a bank, that they go there late, they're by themselves, they're in circumstances, and the only thing we found that works, literally, not figuratively, is light, L-I-G-H-T, lighting. That makes a big difference in terms of the incidence of crime. We provide in this legislation monies for those areas which would impact most upon the occurrences of crime where they most often happen in cities. And everyone seems to be for all those kinds of things. The one place where I find my initiative runs into some difficulty, and I will end with this, is in the area of changing the status, the civil status, if you will, of a violent crime against a woman. In this legislation, which I think is the most important part of the legislation, one of the titles requires that we make a crime that is based totally on gender, and that would be a matter of proof in a courtroom, proving that the reason why the man, and it could be against a man as well, if you can prove that the crime is motivated solely as a consequence of the gender of the individual. For example, if I walk outside and someone knocks me down and steals my wallet, and then runs by you and knocks you down and you have a concussion and steals your purse, you would not, under the Biden legislation, be able to go into federal court and try to collect damages and/or, unless it was in federal property, and/or have your case prosecuted against that individual if they were caught. Conversely, if the crime can be shown by the prosecutor to be directed against you or me, homosexual rape in a prison, it can be against a man as well as against a woman, a crime specifically directed against you because of your sex, then this legislation calls for the creation of a civil remedy, and that is making this a civil rights violation, because your civil right as a woman has been trespassed upon. because we find that the rapists who commit on average one rape every 6 minutes in this country, they tend to be doctors and lawyers, as well as people who are crouched behind garbage disposal or garbage cans in alleys at 2 o'clock in the morning preying on women. And I wonder whether or not you have had any opportunity to focus on what is admittedly the single most controversial piece of my legislation, and from the standpoint of those who support it, the single most innovative; from the standpoint of those who oppose it, the single most intrusive federal effort relative to giving women both a civil cause of action as well as a criminal cause of action, the state taking their case against the perpetrator of a sex-based crime, a gender-based crime.